Hi, everyone. Welcome back for the final class of Comparative Methodologies in the Talmud with Rabbi Yonah Hain. Thank you so much for being here. I think you guys probably all know the drill by now, but as a reminder, I'm going to be promoting people to be panelists, which doesn't put any pressure on you, but we will give you more freedom and more tools that you'll be able to use, such as turning on your camera, which we do encourage you to do, and raising your hand if you have a question. If you are not comfortable raising your hand, then you're welcome to put those questions in the chat instead or in the comments if you're watching us on Facebook. And I'll pass those on. And the last thing is just we do ask that you stay muted when you're not speaking. And I'll be putting the source sheet in the chat. And other than that, I think you guys probably know the drill already. So thank you so much for joining us once again and looking forward to another evening of learning. And thank you, Yonah. Over to you.
Good evening, everyone. Thanks, Chaya. It's been a real treat to work on this material and share it. A number of you have given me really important feedback, and I know if we ever did it again, how I would tweak it. But this week, we're going to go back to the beginning, and we're going to try to see what each of these methodologies is really aiming at. And by going back to the beginning, I don't just mean, but I am including our look at the features of our two methods, right? The academic method is historical, interested in the layers of the Talmud, and interested in the developmental phenomena within the system. Real emphasis on the attributions, the speakers, and the edited and redacted anonymous material. Whereas in the yeshiva, it's really about the phenomena itself. We want to understand the essential versions. We don't care really about the historical. We don't really care about who said it. This is how our tradition has been passed down. These are our principles. What are the values that drive us? But I want to go back to the beginning even more so, because when I was a sixth grader living out in Long Island, I was fortunate enough to study with Rabbi Popak of blessed memory. And I was so young and he was so old, I never learned his first name. You know, when you're a kid and, you know, maybe you'll be asked by someone, who's your teacher? And you're like, Rabbi Popak. They're like, what's their first name? I don't know, Rabbi Popak. So I never learned Rabbi Popak's first name. But what I did learn with him was the fourth chapter of Brachot. That was the first material I ever studied. I want to go back there. And what I want to do is three things tonight. One, I want to explore things through the two methodologies that we're thinking about, the historical versus the analytical, or I should say conceptual. I prefer that terminology. Number two, I actually want to show an example of 20th century or 19th century literature deploying these methods, right? Thus far, we've only examined primary canon material. We haven't seen any secondary literature. I'd like to show an example of each. And third, I want to take a minute and talk about sort of the religious legacies of these methodologies. All right, so let's get to it. Matnitin, our Mishnah. Tfilat hashachar ad chatzot. You may recite the morning prayer until the fourth hour of the day, meaning until the middle hour of the day, right, from sunrise. Rabbi Yehuda Omer ad arba sha'ot. No, only 4 hours into the day. Tfilat hamincha ad ha'erev. There's another dispute with regards to the afternoon prayer. The afternoon prayer can be recited until the evening, not according to Rabbi Yehuda. There's a more limited time frame. Rabbi Yehuda Omer ad plag hamincha, until the midpoint of the afternoon. Tfilat ha'erev ein la keva. So here there's no dispute. The evening prayer, ein la keva, does not have a fix, is not fixed. To it, there is no fix. And I'll leave that ambiguous. Ushel musafim kol hayom, and the additional prayer recited on Shabbat and holidays, the musaf, that could be recited all day. And again, Rabbi Yehuda limits 7 hours after sunrise. So we have a dispute with regards to morning, afternoon, and Musaf. The first opinion in the Mishnah is more expansive. Rabbi Yehuda comes along and limits. And the evening prayer, there isn't a dispute. I am going to ask a hard question. When you read that Mishnah, give me a point of analysis. Give me a question. Give me anything you want. And let me know if you think this is an academic question or a conceptual question. It's hard. You can suffice with just, oh, when I read that, I wonder X.
This is a historic question, but I always wonder about like how they calculate the different times, the halachic times, and how that, like, were they sitting there with sundials? It just seems very exact.
Great. So how was time calculated? Perfect. That's a very practical question. It's a very historical question. Great. What else? Rachel, what do you got?
I mean, the obvious one that you hinted at is, what does Ein Lakeva mean?
Good.
Which I'd say is conceptual.
Depends, though, what kind of answer we give it.
Yeah, okay.
So for me to take this in a conceptual direction, I would say, is there a fundamentally different nature to the evening prayer than these other three listed? Is the fact that there is no dispute around its timing reflective of a different in essence? From an academic standpoint, I would ask a more literary question. Was that part of the Mishnah? Is that a different layer within the editorial hand of the Mishnah, right? It's very strange the way it reads. The morning prayer may be recited, Rabbi Yehuda said. The afternoon prayer may be recited, Rabbi Yehuda says. Evening prayer is not fixed. The Musaf prayer may be recited, Rabbi Yehuda says. From a literary standpoint, it might look superfluous. Now, we're actually not going to chase the tail of that literary question. There are going to be other ones that we get into. Because what I want to do today is, if we really want to talk about the religious legacy, we have to spend a little time talking about what does the law look like based on these different methods. What does halacha look like? By the way, excellent job. That was really sharp and very self-aware, very strong. So let's look at a piece of Talmud based off this, which gets into what is Ein Lakeva. And if we were being more historical, we would look at the Tosefta, which has very important material. We would look at the Yerushalmi, which has very important material. I want to do a more academic and conceptual analysis of this piece of Talmud. Tfilat ha'erev Ein Lakeva. Right? So this is a quotation from the Mishnah. Right? So let's say, quote from the Mishnah, I'm going to put in bold. My Ein Lakeva. Who's asking that?
The stomach.
Good. So that's going to be put in italics. Anonymous material in the Gemara asks, what in the world is this Ein Lakeva business? Tfilat ha'erev Ein Lakeva. I put the quote from the Mishnah in bold. My Ein Lakeva, I put that now in italics. That's going to be the stam. Ilema di'ibay matzli kule lelia. If you want that to mean that it has no fixed time, why would you want Ein Lakeva? There is no fixed time. Sorry, it is not fixed to mean time. Why would you want it to mean that? What advantage is there? What interpretive advantage is there? It fits with the rest of the Mishnah. The Mishnah is all about when prayers may be recited. Who, by the way, is suggesting that this is about time? Rachel, you know this.
Also the stomach.
Yep, this is all going to be the anonymous material. If it meant that you can just pray all night, and it's just like the rest of the Mishnah, insofar as it is communicating when the time for prayer is. So litni tefillat erev kol halayla. So don't say ein la keva, but say like the rest say, right? Tefillat hashachar ad chatzot, or shel musafim kol hayom. So say tefillat erev kol halayla. Don't say ein la keva. It is not fixed. Say it goes all night. Now, again, this is still the anonymous voice. Elamai ein la keva. So what does ein la keva mean? It actually is referring to a Tanaitic dispute. Kamanda amar tfilat arvit reshut. Rather, it's trying to convey that it's not fixed, meaning it's not obligatory. Evening prayers are volitional. De Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel. Now, this is going to be interesting. What kind of statement is this? Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel. This is now an attribution. It's no longer anonymous. What kind of rabbi is Rav Yehuda in the name of Shmuel? Tana, Amora, Gaonik, Rishonim. You got it, Rachel. Don't be bashful.
Yeah. I thought, well, this is Rav Yehuda, not Rabbi Yehuda. So I
Correct.
think it's an Amora.
Mm-hmm. And Shmuel certainly is. Right.
Right.
Shmuel argues with Rav. That's first generation of the Amoraim. But this is where things get weird. What did Rav Yehuda say in the name of Shmuel? With regards to Tfilat Arvit, with regards to the nighttime prayer, Rabbi Gamliel Omer Chova, Rabbi Yoshua Omer Reshut. So Amoraic material, I want to put in underlines. And Tanaitic material, I want to put in highlights. So this is an Amora quoting oh, no, I meant to do that. Highlight, not that. There we go. So that is now an Amoraic statement quoting a Tanaitic teaching. The Amoraic material is underlined. The Tanaitic material is highlighted. Amar Abaye, the sugya finishes out. Halacha kedivrei Omer Chova, v'Rava Amar Halacha kedivrei HaOmer Reshut. We have a Tanaitic dispute, and then we have a Amoraic dispute as well. We just took this one passage, right? And this doesn't even include biblical source material, which I would highlight in a different color. But we have a quote from a Mishnah, which is bold. We have the Stam material, which I italicized. We have Amoraic material, which I underlined. And then we have Tanaitic material that I used a highlight for. And it gets even weirder because part of the Amoraic material is quoting the Tanaitic material. So if you want to get into the layers of the Talmud, you want to start color coding, you want to start identifying the different voices within. The dispute that we're going to spend our time on, though, is Mariv as Reshut or Mariv as Chovah. Can someone translate that dispute? Just say it in English, right? Rabbi Gamliel said Chovah, Rabbi Yoshua said Reshut. Well, just say it in English.
Do you have
Reshut.
a halachic obligation to daven Mariv or not? And I don't think they're talking about with a minyan. They're just saying, just say it.
Good. And so can you translate each term? Miriam, what is Chovah?
I called it a halachic obligation.
It's obligatory. its recitation is obligatory. You have an obligation to recite it. And reshut?
You have permission to choose if you want to or not.
It's optional. Good. Okay. Now, we're going to get into some fun halacha that is dependent upon how we analyze this. Let's look at source number 4.
I'm sorry, I never thought about it before, but is there any other example of something that you have that's a prayer that's optional? Like if you eat bread, you have to say hamotzi and you have to bench. Like what other prayer would be optional? Because if it is, like, wouldn't that be an issue with, shame?
Can I sharpen the question, Miriam?
Yeah.
When you read the Hebrew Bible, is it apparent to you that there is a religious legal category of optional? There are prohibitions, there are commandments, there are don'ts, there are do's.
Oh, right. But
Weird.
there's also the voluntary offerings, the carbonate. Right?
Sure.
The shlemim and all
Sure.
that.
Yeah, you can choose to do it.
So that's what it would be based on. Okay, thank you.
We'll spend a little bit more time on Reshut and Chovah towards the end. So let's get into how this all unfolded. Let's look at source number 4, Rambam. Any chance I can get a volunteer to read number 4 for us? Again, original or English?
I could read.
Thank you.
They also instituted a prayer to be recited at night, since the limbs of the daily afternoon offering could be burnt the whole night. As in Leviticus 6:2 states, the burnt offering shall remain on the altar hearth all night until morning. In this vein, Psalms 55:18 states, in the evening, morning, and afternoon, I will speak and cry aloud, and God will hear my voice. The evening prayer.
So this is getting into the material that some of you may know that we're not getting into, we're kind of avoiding, about the relationship between the sacrifices and the prayers. Miriam alluded to it a little bit, but
The evening prayer is not obligatory, as are the morning and afternoon prayers. Nevertheless, the Jewish people in all the places that they have settled are accustomed to recite the evening prayer and have accepted it upon themselves as an obligatory prayer.
so in Rambam, is Arvit Reshut or Chovah?
I think it's become Chovah.
Right. So technically, we may technically Rabbi Yehushua's Reshut may have been correct, but we have accepted upon ourselves Rabbi Gamliel's Chovah. Is that fair to say? Okay. Now watch this move. All right, Debbie, thank you very much. Let's see if we can get another volunteer for number 5. Thank you, Lisa.
Let me unmute. One to whom it is uncertain if they prayed or not does not go back and pray unless one prayed the prayer as voluntary. For one may recite voluntary prayers throughout the entire day.
Let's pause. So if it's an obligatory prayer, you don't go back unless what you were doing was what's called a nidava. No, I can go back for a nidava, this voluntary, because I can do that all day. Right? It's a little counterintuitive. If it was obligatory and you're not sure if you prayed, you don't daven again. But if it was all just extra to begin with, so extra is extra. And now this is going to be good for Mariv. Right? Is Mariv extra or not? So let's go.
One who is standing in prayer and remembered having already prayed, stops even in the middle of a blessing. But if it was the evening prayer, one does not stop, for at the outset one prayed it with the awareness that it is not a requirement.
So if I'm in the middle of praying, I'm in the middle of the Amidah, and I realize I already daven mincha. By the way, this happens to me a couple times a year. So what am I doing? I already did this. You stop in the middle. But if it's Mariv, you continue. Because the whole reason why you were praying was as a nidava, as voluntary, as volitional. Every single person in the world asks on Maimonides, what in the heck are you talking about? 9 chapters earlier, you told us we accepted it upon ourselves as an obligation. How in the world are you telling me now that in the middle of the prayer, if I realize I already did it, I continue anyway, because it's volitional. So how ready are we for what we call brisker Torah? Yeah, are we excited? Are we pumped?
Love the briskers. Woohoo!
Let's go, Miriam. Let's go. So this was published posthumously, but Rabbi Chaim Soloveitchik in source number 6. This is his magnum opus and his methodology on display, right? In the conceptual analysis, we are less interested in bringing proofs as to who is right, as to animating what generated each opinion conceptually. So Rabbi Soloveitchik, right, and if you've read any of the 20th century, Joseph Soloveitchik, this is his grandfather. Rabbi Chaim Soloveitchik is about to say, there are 2 ways to understand that this prayer is volitional, but we've accepted it as an obligation. One is to say now it's just obligatory, and it's like the morning and afternoon prayers. Alternatively, and this is what he's going to argue for Rambam, there is a difference between the requirement to recite it and the essence of what you are reciting. That essentially, definitionally, conceptually, even if it is obligatory, the evening prayer remains obligatory as a volitional prayer. And if that sounds like it's going in circles, the Brisker method may not be for everyone. Let's read what he writes. And I'm just going to read my translation. And according to the opinion of Maimonides, one must say that obligatory and voluntary prayers are varied in their very essence, right? This is not about the development of Mariv. This is not about historically how it came to be, right? This is not academic. They are fundamentally different if they are voluntary or obligatory. The evening prayer is voluntary and has the status of nidava. And that which we established it as an obligation, the meaning is that they established an obligation upon us and themselves to pray a voluntary and nidava prayer. For the essential decree and obligation is only voluntary and a nidava. Conceptually, Mariv remains volitional. It's just that you have to say it. Now, for some people, words don't mean anything according to this. How do you have your cake and eat it too? He separates between practically whether or not you have to say it and the identity, the ethos, the animating character and conceptualization of the prayer. And the prayer is voluntary, but you have to say it. As such, Maimonides' ruling is consistent. For the evening prayer is essentially voluntary and the nadava. So it naturally doubles as a nadava in the case where one already recited the evening prayer, for they are one and the same. The other prayers which are obligatory in their essence, they cannot be doubled as a nadava, for they are 2 altogether different things. From the lomdus of this question of Mariv and mistakes, we are asking, what does ein lakeva mean? What does reshut mean? Even as we take it as a practical obligation, it remains identity-wise as voluntary. Now, I have to tell you, That's all Reb Chaim Soloveitchik would be willing to do. That's all he says. They're rigid legal categories. Already, Rabbi Soloveitchik and others now take a step back and say, so what is the philosophical meaning of this? I actually find this to be very inspiring. The nature of the 3 daily prayers are not identical. The first 2, those are just, workhorse. Obligation, obligation, obligation. The evening prayer, even though you have to say it, that's supposed to be something of an opt-in. The intent, the identity, the religious orientation there, that's an optionality. He doesn't speak in these terms. These are already not legal. They're a little too legal philosophy for him. But the categories have deep meaning. They are not random. This is the lomdus of Marav and mistakes. The analytical philosophy, the conceptualization. Marav may have become obligatory, but it remains in its identity voluntary. Questions, thoughts, challenges, traumas. Does everyone see how this is like classic, even if not classic, how this is the quintessence of yeshiva learning? We're taking an idea and splitting hairs to such an extent that the category that we thought we were in can still be the other category. We agree that it's reshut, but now it's become chovah. But it's become chovah practically, but in essence, it's still reshut.
It's a little embarrassing that I'm still confused on our very last day, but it's a confusing thing. Okay, so I had been thinking that in your literary v yeshiva world, right? I thought literary was looking like at the language, and this is clearly like situated there. But no,
Yeah,
okay.
everyone wants close reads. Everyone wants close reads. I don't subscribe to the criticism that will say the yeshiva doesn't read closely. I don't think that's true at all. Everyone wants close reads.
That was a higher level question that I was asking. I guess I just don't really understand. So can you, I'm so sorry.
What I mean by literary is you're taking apart the literary layers of the text. We're looking at who said what. We're looking at, right? Like take this Mishnah. The literary analysis is to wonder, wait a minute. We have 4 topics: morning, afternoon, evening, and additional prayer. Shachrit, Mincha, Maariv, Musaf. 3 of them follow the same identical structure. Expansive opinion, Rabbi Yehuda's limiting opinion. One of them, Maariv, doesn't follow the pattern at all. Is that a different literary strand that was then sewn in at a later date? Literary doesn't mean pay attention to the words. It means you are invested in the construction of the text. Does that make sense, Miriam?
Yeah, totally. I was thinking about it from like an ELA point of view, where literary would mean like rhetorical devices, but that's not it at all. It's like you were saying, the like more of the structure, and maybe historicity, like who said what when, and
Boom.
what's valid.
Yeah. One of the problems with this is we're touching on a lot of genres of fields of study. And I think there's a great degree of imprecision in what I'm saying, because I'm trying to reference things vis-a-vis the Mishnah and Talmud. And so it's a little tricky. I might sometimes step in it in order to try to explain a phenomenon. Okay, but let's get back to Reb Chaim. Describing Mariv as factually obligatory, but quintessentially reshut, that is some real brisker Torah. That is having your cake and eating it too. Okay. What are academics interested in when it comes to this topic? So let's look. Remember, we have some secondary literature. Someone want to read number 7 for us?
Okay. The Tanaim and Amoraim argued whether the evening prayer is obligatory or volitional, as opposed to the morning and afternoon prayers, about which no doubt has been raised that they are obligatory.
Now, once there is this sort of discrepancy in academia, we can start asking, what are the authentic Tanaitic transmissions? What are the authentic Amoraic transmissions? Right? You're allowed to start reconstructing.
A reasonable assumption is that the difference stems from the difference in the origin of the prayers. The morning and afternoon prayers were fundamentally connected to the liturgy in the temple. The priests held a prayer over the course of their work, and the public directed their prayer to the timing of the sacrifices or the incense. But the evening prayer...
Katz is interested in the historical development, right? Not just this phenomenon of Mariv, and whether its identity is that of, volition or obligation. How did this emerge? How did this develop? Well, we had priests, they had prayers. We then directed our prayers to somewhat correspond to something similar. But the evening prayer, Rachel.
But the evening prayer arose from the simple human need to pray with the passage of time, the setting of the day, and the entrance of the night. And it seemed in accordance with the opinion of scholars that the evening prayer was originally only an individual's prayer.
Now he goes on to discuss, when did the practice start that you recite Mariv before sunset? Right? But he's making 2 historical claims. One, Mariv is a little bit of the forgotten child, right? It was just added on. And number 2, he's saying it also stands to reason, if you think about it historically, they didn't gather at night. It originated as just an individual's prayer. There was no minyan. There was no quorum, tefillah, b'tzibor notion. These are historical assumptions. These are theories that he goes on to try to prove. But he's not asking, what is the identity? What are the values animate? He's asking, how did this emerge? How did this develop? How did this come to be? So in recap, we looked at the literary layers of a very short passage of Talmud. We identified a quote from a Mishnah, then a large anonymous statement, then an Amoraic statement, which included Tanaitic material, and then 2 Amoraic statements. The layers of the Talmud come to life if you analyze things closely. We then looked at the Brisker methodology, which tried to get at the essence, the quintessence of Mariv. And then we looked at a historical way of analyzing this material and asking, where did Mariv come about? Why is it different historically? Right? Not because of its quintessence. And what does that say about its development over the course of time in Jewish life? So these are some of the methods or the features of these methods, right? In the academy, we want to see how Mariv developed. Its history is important. We treat the text like literature with layers to deconstruct. We're obsessed with the attributions and the editors, and we are in a position of reconstruction. In the yeshiva, it's about the conceptual. How do I understand Mariv? What is it about? Is it about obligation or is it about volition? What is this law that it's chovah? Who are the opinions and how is the tradition unfolded? So I want to take a minute to, to let this wash over us, because, you know, Drisha is an educational institution, but it's deeply invested in our religious identities, right? It may not have particular dogmas of how we should pray, but it is certainly invested in knowledge and character, and not just being a source of information and learning growth without moral development. What are the legacies of these two methods religiously? When I say the academic method, what do you think of religiously? Put a word in the chat. You could say what, you know, it could be a person, it could be a place, it could be a thing, it could be one of the features we just said. What do you think of religiously? Yes. Miriam, yes, in many ways. I'm going a little bit further than what you find in the Chosen, because the Chosen is not, it's yeshiva, but it is not as methodological as this approach.
Because the concern there, I mean, I haven't read this in a couple of decades, but from what I remember, the concern there was that it was taking, you were talking about like the religious, what do you think about? And I think the concern was that it takes God out of it and turns it just into a text.
Good. Which one?
The academic one.
Good. There are many, certainly, many ultra-Orthodox people are very scared of historizing halacha. Historicizing. There's a syllable missing there. Put it this way. Once you're identifying the layers of the Talmud and you're acknowledging that maybe there are forced explanations, maybe you're saying this Tfilat Ha'erev Ein La Keva is a later addition, you are removing some of its authority. What else? Anybody else have a thought that they want to share in the, just again, the academic method and its religious legacy? Or what does it make you feel? Miriam, critics of it will say, I could do that type of literary treatment to any document. I would say there's a tremendous intellectual honesty to it. I care deeply about what the words, not just the tradition have understood them, but let's get the proper text. I care about it so much that I'm willing to go through all these layers. Right? It's almost like the difference between shopping, cooking, and eating versus someone just serving you a meal. Good. Debbie points out that you actually, when it comes to halacha, you actually can appreciate the development and the evolution. 2,000 years ago, when they practiced Shabbat, it didn't look like the way they practice Shabbat in my house or your house. Good. Esther, great. I think when it comes to halacha, the development of it is emphasized. When it comes to Talmud, it's a little different. All right, now when I talk about the yeshiva methodology, what do you think the religious, what comes to mind religiously?
Just one more thought on the academic one. Like, I mean, I'll be honest. When I first heard it, I was like, well, at least we're only doing it to Gemara, and that's like Torah or something, you know. But I think, Gemara, I'm not sure that the purpose is to find out like who actually said what, because at this point, you know, it doesn't really matter because there's like 2,000 years worth of responsum that's, you know, based on that. But what I think that it might do is open up space, because it can get very monolithic. Oh, we have 2,000 years worth of responsum. This is the way it is, has always been and will always be, and God said so. And so by opening that up a little bit, you know, I think that that might make room for new ideas, which we need.
I think that's super well put. And I bet if you had a biblical scholar here, they could make the same argument for examining with a historical critical lens Tanakh as well. That's not my cup of tea, but yeah, I spent a couple of years learning with someone who was a Tanakh expert, and I was more into rabbinics, Chazal. and we would always find material to learn in between. We would study rabbinic interpretive methods towards the Torah. So he was on solid ground and I was on solid ground. And he's a young fellow. And whenever I would be like, no, that's not my thing. That's Tanakh. He would always say to me, OG, right, is an important term for younger people. Original gangsta. It doesn't have to do with any actual crimes committed, just means you are on things early. So he always had this great line to me. He says, nah, Tanakh is just the OG Chazal, which I've come to appreciate. But yeah, I enjoy these reconstructive methods more here. But look, you read certain chapters in Tanakh and you're like, I see the seams. I see the editorialization here. I see how things were hemmed and sewn together. Now, for me, that doesn't have to be an authorship question. That could be literary stylings. But it is worthwhile. Now, what about sort of the religious legacy of the yeshiva? Anything come up? Yeah. There's something both Debbie writes, it's like focusing on the minutia, A, and B, appreciating multiple sides. Yeah. I always loved the pluralism of lomdus. Doesn't matter whose idea it is, as long as it's within the bounds of the topic. That makes sense. That's great. So I want to point out, and this is something that I'm arguing, and I've had a couple of historians think there's there, and I've had others who laughed at me. In the intellectual development of Talmud interpretation, I think these two schools have more in common than practitioners or students of one versus the other realize. See, the greatest revolution that Reb Chaim introduced is not focusing on Maimonides, and it's not focusing on each side of a dispute as opposed to trying to prove one right. The biggest difference, I would say the most revolutionary thing that the yeshiva method introduced is the directionality of the learner. Before the yeshiva revolution of lomdus, what learning was gathering everything that was said before and trying to prove who was right or wrong and cite different forms of evidence. You were reacting. Reb Chaim Soloveitchik said, no. You read the material and you are the first move. Your conceptual framework, your understanding of what's the nature of reading Megillah? How do we understand the bracha before food? Please or thank you. Your move when it comes to issuing a warning, is that for the court or for the perpetrator? It's your move trying to understand why is it greater to be obligated than to do it volitionally. It's your move to understand the nature of the evening prayer. Your conceptual frameworks get the ball rolling. That, to me, is a critical step in the evolution of Talmudic study. Because you fast forward, and once the Wissenschaft movement, the historical understanding of Judaism, turns its attention towards Talmud, you have this notion of reconstructing layers of the Talmud. You have Professor Halivni of blessed memory saying, I think that's a forced explanation, and that passage is actually just transported improperly from a different part of the Talmud. That's an editorial gloss. That's a later accretion. That's not a Tanaitic kernel. That didn't originate with the Amora. Methodologically, it's fundamentally different than the yeshiva. But directionality-wise, it's the same. You as a learner are not just passive. You are steering the sugya. For Brisk, it's the conceptual framework. Oh, is the bracha a please or a thank you? For the academy, it's which layers of the sugya are Tanaitic, are Amoraic, or are later. I think without one, you would not have the other. Thoughts, questions, before I leave you with one last thing. So I think a lot of critics and proponents of these methods kind of hate on the other. For me, there's a lot of intellectual honesty and depth and religious meaning and significance in each. I love the thoroughness and the intellectual honesty of the academy. I love the meaning making of the yeshiva. I love trying to understand the roots of the trees and the forest that those trees make up. I think the academy and the yeshiva represent those respectively. I want to share one last idea, and one of the things that I think is really nice about this first sugya. This is the first Gemara I ever learned. And I've shared with some of you that I'm embarking on writing a dissertation. And I have a dissertation topic. My dissertation topic is the emergence, character, and development of the religious legal category of volition in rabbinic literature, reshut. Because Miriam explained reshut. Hold on one second. I've had a wonderful child trying to get my attention. This is A+ parenting. I have 4 minutes left. Get out. Miriam beautifully explained before, reshut and chovah refer to whether it is obligatory or volitional to recite the prayer. There is another interpretation that I think drastically changes the legal philosophical stakes. Reb Shri Gaon, writing in the 10th century. And the opinion Chovah says thusly, that one who does not perform it stands in sin. Right, so that's a little different. Demandelo avidla ka'im ba'avon. Right, it's not obligatory that you have to do it. Rather, ulahachi kari la chova. This is why it's called a chova, that one is accountable. Shechayavin aleh avon. Obligatory is the wrong translation for chova. Chova means accountable. Umandam reshut and reshut hachi kamar mitzvah shereshut baladam inicha lebeschar avid levikani levim lav avid schar vein avon. And reshut means you have authority. This has a fundamentally different understanding of chovah and reshut. This is saying chovah means you will be in debt if you don't do it. And reshut is you have authority. And what I'm excited to pursue, and I really think this class has been leading up to this, that means there are two different connotations of reshut. One connotation is it's volitional, it's optional. It's like a bathroom pass. The rabbis are the ones with the authority, but they give you an exemption. In that case, reshut reinforces the power structure. But according to Reb Shri Gaon, reshut means in certain religious arenas, the individual practitioner has authority. You are given religious autonomy. Right? Chovah means you'll have a debt, but reshut means you have this. This is your domain. And the reason why I think that's so important is because many of you have communicated with me your different understandings, exposures, relationship with rabbinic literature. And what I really want us to do, and this course can be just a drop in the bucket towards that, turning rabbinic literature into something that we demystify, and we turn it into a reshut, not something that if we want, we can opt in or not. You know, the people who know it give you a little taste and you can get entry. But actually, I want it to be something that we have authority over. something that it is in our religious domain autonomously to step into it whenever we can, however we want. Thanks everyone for a great series.
All right. So do we have any questions? I don't think we have any on Facebook, but anyone want to jump in?
I want to thank everyone for sticking with this because, you know, what I learned was it's actually probably too ambitious to try a different method each week. And what we want to do if we do it again is actually teach a few methods and then practice them and try to not necessarily new literary techniques, right? A lot of the academic stuff got in the weeds, but actually try to break down a sugya. What are the different layers? Try to analyze a dispute, and what is the conceptual underpinnings. So thanks everyone for being the guinea pigs. Much appreciated.
Thank you so much, Yonah. Thank you for everyone who joined us. Thank you to everyone who joined us. And yeah, this has been a wonderful Zman. We have lots of exciting things coming up, so stay tuned. I think the current thing that you can register for is our Mishnah class, upcoming Mishnah class, which I used to know the topic and I've forgotten, but it's going to be wonderful. We have a really amazing Mishnah program at Trisha. So do check that out. And yeah, looking forward to learning with all of you very soon. And Chag Sameach to everyone. See you all soon. Good night.
Yasher koach. Metzuyan.